I don't know who wrote that introduction. It wasn't me, honest. Do we need a 40-minute stretch? No, I mean, after a 40-minute talk, particularly so depressing. And now it's perfect to talk about a cemetery. So how many people have been to the cemetery at Lee's Ferry? Would you? Yeah, I figured a group like this would be a lot of people. Those of you who haven't been there, if you park at Lonely Dell and you walk up past the orchard and past the buildings, go a couple hundred yards further, you come to the cemetery here in this broad section of Paria Canyon, and you can see where the Paria is running back here on the line of cottonwoods. It's hard to imagine that those fields were once rich farmland, isn't it? This is a small cemetery. There are only 20 graves here. The first one was placed in 1874 and the last in 1933. Imagine, whoops, wow. Didn't mean to give that much of a preview. So imagine walking through the gate here into the grounds. And a lot of really interesting stories here. This kind of square grave right here. This is where Waddy Ligon was buried, a retired miner from Bisbee, Arizona. What he was doing up here, that's an interesting question. This rather undistinguished stone, this is the stone for Archimedes McClurg. He's the only person in the cemetery we know who was murdered. He was actually shot in the chest on the other side of the river over by Navajo Spring. No one was ever charged for the crime. The biggest marker here, John Kitchen, a rancher from Utah. If you're driving from Kanab to Page, there's a turn to Kitchen Canyon to the north. That was his range. If you look up there, the geologic formation of Molly's Nipple supposedly was named for Kitchen's wife. I don't know if that's true, but he wasn't amused. This grave right here, that's the grave of John T. Emmett, the son of the ferryman John S. Emmett. He died in the very, very cold winter of 1909. The ground was so hard, they couldn't dig a grave. And they buried him temporarily in the Lee's Ferry root cellar, or excuse me, the Lonely Dell root cellar. Some say his body is still there. But this stone right here, this is what I want to really start talking about. This is where Lucy Emmett was buried, a daughter of John S. Emmett. Let's take a close look at that. This is a really undistinguished stone, just some stone picked up in the vicinity. Lucy Emmett, B and D, kind of an odd abbreviation, hey? Born and died, June 11, 190. Can you see that? Does that show up? I'll tell you the truth. I went to the cemetery on several visits before I really looked carefully at this stone. And when I finally took a close look at it, it's kind of hard to read. I thought, gee, what is going on here? Well, if you want to really understand the cemetery, you need to know a little bit about this guy, P.T. Reilly. Now, we've been hearing about P.T. Reilly. This is a completely different version of P.T. Reilly. This is the old P.T. Reilly who couldn't run the river as much anymore. Gets a lot of sympathy from me. But Reilly began working on this monumental book in 1964. And he worked on it for 20 years. Never saw it published. It was published after his death. It's a wonderful reference book. That being said, I find it difficult to read. I don't know, have people, I read about 2 pages of this and I can't keep my eyes open. So, yeah. But if you want to, for reference, if you're looking for a specific topic, really a good book. If you're new to Lee's Ferry history, want to learn something, this is really a nice book to start with. Very readable, very informative. Quite honestly, a lot of the information comes from Reilly. And if you're talking about the cemetery, it literally all comes from Reilly. So what does Reilly have to say about this? Well, he says a lot about the Emmett family, great detail about the Emmett family. Lucy Emmett, of course, very short life. There are really only 2 very small references to Lucy Emmett. And he says, and Reilly says absolutely nothing about the stone. But if you go down to the Klein Library, the special collections, and look at the Reilly collection, you can find a lot of interesting information in his correspondence. He has boxes and boxes of correspondence and research notes, and if you paw through them, this is just a little excerpt from a letter. I've written it out here so I can read it a little bit better. This was written to an Emmett relative, Clara Davis, in 1965. I enclose a picture of the marker which I erected for John's infant. That's John T. Emmett. It is made of hard sandstone, and the letters are chiseled into the rock. The missing digit can be cut when we find out the years of Lucy's death. So that's pretty informative. Well, let's just go back and look at that stone. So Reilly put this stone here himself in the fall of 1964, and he didn't know what the correct digit was here. He didn't know if it was 1901 or 1902. When he finally figured out, had good documentation that the correct year was 1902, he never went back and filled that in. He just left it like it was. And I personally think that was a good thing to do. I'll tell you why in a little bit. So Reilly always typed out these long letters, asked multiple questions of people, and that's one of the ways he gathered information. In this case, Clara Davis just put a couple of little notes in response to his various questions and then mailed it back to him. And here you can see her comment here to this rather ragged marker. I thank you so much. Quite honestly, the family was very happy to have Lucy Emmett's grave identified and even a simple marker placed on it. So let's move on. This is the grave of Calvin Johnson, buried in 1928. A nice original header here, a nice original footer. Those were placed in 1928 when Calvin was buried. This is a modern marker the family put up probably about 1980, give or take a few years. But look at the stone right here, kind of peeking out behind the footer. I want to take a closer look at that. There's that footer. Calvin Marshall Johnson, May 12, 1928, December 14, ditto. Does that abbreviation ring any bells? Does that remind you of the abbreviation on the Lucy Emmett stone? I hope so. I hope it does. What does Reilly have to say about this? Well, again, goes into great detail about the Johnson family, a very important family at Lee's Ferry. Warren Johnson was the main ferryman at the ferry for 20 years during a very important pioneer period. Many of the other people buried in the cemetery are related to Warren Johnson. And Calvin is actually a grandson of Warren Johnson. Reilly doesn't talk a lot about Calvin Johnson. He died before he was a year old. 1928. A child had about a chance, one chance in 10 of dying during that first year. And that's the reason all these pioneer cemeteries are just chock full of kids. And what does Reilly say about this stone? Does he say anything specifically about this stone? He doesn't say anything in his book, but again, if you wade through his correspondence, you can see this very nice letter to Owen Johnson. And here, I think I can read it better from here. Enclosed is a photo of your little brother's grave and the marker I erected last fall. The rock is hard, fine-grained sandstone. I think that's a little bit of an oversell. The letters are chiseled into the face. Sorry I had to revert to ditto marks for the year of death, but it was the second one I cut that afternoon, and my fingers, being unused to the work, became so cramped I could hardly hold the chisel. I'll spell it out next visit. Anyway, the inscription is cut deep enough to last a long time. Well, obviously the ditto marks are still there. This is just another view of the Calvin Johnson grave. Header, footer, the originals from 1928. Here's that modern marker obscured by some decoration here. Here's that Reilly stone. Now I'm going to move over here and talk about this stone, which is also a Reilly stone. But first, I'm going to talk about this. A nice historic photograph from 1971. You can find this in the Glen Canyon archives. Look at the fields up here. Really nice. You're not going to see those fields plowed again. Of course, they were watered with Paria River water, and this is the irrigation channel right here. You can still see that irrigation channel if you go up there, and it's worth noting. Rich stands of alfalfa came from this field. Hard to imagine, but that's kind of a salt-resistant crop, and it did well on Paria River water. They also grew watermelons, although some people say they tasted funny. The water gave them a peculiar taste. These 4 graves right here, these are the Johnson children, the Warren Johnson children, who died in a single outbreak of diphtheria in 1891. This is Melinda's grave, 16 years old. She was actually the oldest. The only reason I mention her specifically is that name will come up again in just a minute. And so the Calvin Johnson grave. Look at this. Here's the P.T. Reilly stone in front. So this is a nice photograph because it tells us that family marker that was put in front wasn't put up until sometime after 1971. They came along, put their marker in, moved the Reilly stone around to behind the footer, and I'm really glad they did that because they saved an interesting historic artifact. Okay, let's go over and look at this stone right now. We must have taken a couple dozen photographs of this stone over a couple of years, and none of them can you read the inscription. It's just a hard stone to photograph. It's got this modeling on the surface here. In desperation, we finally drug a piece of black cardboard up there to act as a backdrop, and when it was front lit, it helped a little bit. You can almost read this, but it's not terribly good. We took this photograph and sent it off to Merrill Graffam, a talented artist, and he did this sketch for us. And this stands out so much nicer. Merrill was the BLM ranger at Bigwater for the Grand Staircase for many years. He's retired now. Some of you may have met him. He's done a lot of drawings of petroglyph sites in this area, and the petroglyphs turn out so nice. You can see so many details from a sketch. let's back up just a second. So go look for Lewis Spencer in P.T. Reilly's book. You don't find anything because there was no Lewis Spencer. This is a misspelling. This should be spelled Lucius. And this is part of the story of that. This is a letter that Reilly wrote to a couple of Johnson relatives in 1968. And here, let me read this. Thanks also for the dates on the Spencer baby. By the way, the mother was Johnson. Her father had been Warren Johnson. And for correcting the name. Price gave him the spelling of Lucius, and he must be wrong. Well, he was right. Price says that the Spencer baby is buried where Owen thought Price's boy Calvin was, so I will change the stone for Calvin to the one beside Melinda and make a new one for Lewis. Well, let's see if we can decipher that. So here's the Reilly stone. When Reilly placed this in 1964, he actually placed it right here. And then about 1968, when he started getting more information, he said, well, that stone needs to be moved, and he moved it over here, and he put up a new one for Lucius, Lewis, whatever. And then the Johnson family came and put their marker in and moved Reilly's to the back. So Reilly, out of 20 graves in this cemetery, Reilly placed 3 of the stones himself. In 1964 and 1968, all 3 of the stones had mistakes on them, and the mistakes were never corrected. I think that's a really good thing because it helps us understand how difficult it was to reconstruct the history of the cemetery. Families being what they are, 50 years goes past, and one person remembers one thing a little differently, and the spelling of the name was a little different. Very common. This isn't unique to this family. This is characteristic of families everywhere. And Reilly really did a great service to come along and really document this interesting historic period. In many, many ways, Reilly is as much a part of the cemetery as the people that are buried there. So I hope that you'll maybe take an opportunity to go visit the cemetery again or for the first time, and maybe read about some of the interesting stories there if you haven't already. A lot of interesting history, a lot of nice hiking here too. Okay, I think that's everything I'm going to say.